When psycho HOA President Karen threw my 4-day-old baby Grace into a freezing river over noise complaints, I jumped in to save her life. But karma struck hard. While Karen sat in handcuffs at the police station, her own husband served her divorce papers. Evil never wins. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how the worst day of my life became the day that changed everything. It was supposed to be the happiest time of my life. I had just brought home my newborn daughter, Grace, from the hospital 3 days ago. She was perfect, tiny fingers, soft brown hair, and the sweetest little face I had ever seen. My husband Jake and I have grown stronger as a family through this experience. We learned that we would do anything to protect our daughter, and that love is more powerful than hate. Our neighborhood is now one of the safest and most family-friendly in the city. Children play freely in the streets and parks without fear. Parents have coffee together while their kids ride bikes and draw with chalk on the sidewalks. Sometimes new residents ask about the previous HOA president, having heard rumors about problems in the past. We simply tell them that the old administration was removed and that the community is much better now. We occasionally receive updates about Karen's life in prison through the Victim Services Program. She has not adjusted well to incarceration and has been placed in solitary confinement multiple times for fighting with other inmates. Ironically, many of the women in prison are mothers who have lost their children to the system or worse circumstances. They have no tolerance for someone who tried to murder a baby. Karen has become one of the most hated inmates in the facility. She has filed multiple appeals of her conviction, all of which have been denied. Her claims of mental illness and unfair trial have been rejected by every court that has reviewed her case. Robert, her ex-husband, has remarried and started a new life. He has completely cut all contact with Karen and refuses to visit her in prison. He told Victim Services that he considers her dead to him. Karen will spend the rest of her life in a small cell, thinking about the 4-day-old baby she tried to murder over HOA complaints. She traded a comfortable life and loving husband for a lifetime of prison isolation, all because she couldn't stand the sound of a baby occasionally crying. Last month, Grace started first grade at the local elementary school. On her first day, she wore a bright pink dress and carried a backpack covered in butterflies. She was excited and confident, showing no signs of the trauma she experienced as an infant. I walked her to school through our peaceful neighborhood, past the house where Karen used to live, now home to a lovely family with 3 young children, past the river where I saved her life, and up to the school where she would begin her education. "Mommy, will you pick me up after school?" Grace asked as we reached her classroom. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, giving her a big hug. "I'll be waiting right here when school ends." She ran into her classroom without looking back, ready to make new friends and learn new things. Watching her fearless confidence filled my heart with pride and joy. As I walked home, I thought about how different our lives could have been if Karen had succeeded in her evil plan. Grace might not be here today running into first grade with excitement and innocence. But evil didn't win. Love won. Community won. Justice won. Karen spent years trying to control and terrorize our neighborhood through fear. In the end, her hatred destroyed only herself. She lost everything: her freedom, her family, her home, and her future, while the baby she tried to murder grew up healthy and happy. Every night when I tuck Grace into bed, I make the same silent promise I've made since the day she was born: I will always protect you no matter what. Karen tried to take Grace away from us when she was just 4 days old. She failed because a mother's love is stronger than any hatred, and because good people will always outnumber the evil ones. Grace falls asleep each night surrounded by stuffed animals and picture books, safe in a house filled with love. She dreams of playground adventures and birthday parties, not knowing that once upon a time, a monster tried to steal her life. But I remember the weight of that soggy cardboard box in my hands as I pulled her from the river. I remember her blue lips and terrified cries. I remember thinking I might lose her forever. And I remember the sound of Karen's handcuffs clicking shut as she was led away to spend the rest of her life in prison. Justice was served. Our family survived. Our community healed. Grace is alive, healthy, and happy. Karen is locked away forever, facing the consequences of her evil choices. In the end, that's all that matters. Love conquered hate, good defeated evil, and an innocent baby grew up to become a beautiful, confident little girl who brightens every day with her laughter. Karen wanted to destroy us, but instead she made us stronger. She wanted to divide our community, but instead she brought us together. She wanted to eliminate the sound of children playing, but instead she created a neighborhood where children's laughter fills the air from morning until night. The woman who threw my baby in a river thinking she could get away with it learned the hardest lesson of all. A mother's love knows no limits, and justice may be delayed, but it will never be denied. Grace is safe. Karen is gone. And our story ends exactly as it should, with good triumphing over evil, and with a little girl who will never know how close she came to losing everything, growing up surrounded by love and protected by a community that would do anything to keep her safe. This is our victory. This is our justice. This is our happy ending. This story serves as a reminder that evil actions have consequences, that communities must protect their most vulnerable members, and that love will always triumph over hatred. Grace's survival and Karen's downfall show that justice, though sometimes delayed, will ultimately prevail. And I had been trying to have a baby for 5 years. We went through heartbreak after heartbreak, failed pregnancies, and expensive treatments. When Grace finally arrived healthy and beautiful, we felt like our prayers had been answered. Our little miracle was finally home. We lived in Willowbrook Heights, a quiet neighborhood with nice houses and tree-lined streets. Most of our neighbors were friendly families with children. It seemed like the perfect place to raise Grace and watch her grow up safely. But there was one person who made life difficult for everyone in our neighborhood. Her name was Karen Whitfield, and she was the president of our homeowners association. Karen was a woman in her early 50s with cold gray eyes and a permanent frown. She treated our neighborhood like her personal kingdom and made everyone's life miserable with her endless rules and complaints. I thought I could avoid Karen's attention by keeping to myself and following all the HOA rules. I was wrong. Karen lived in the biggest house on our street with her husband Robert. Robert was a quiet, kind man who worked as an accountant. He always looked tired and sad, and I often wondered how he ended up married to someone so cruel. Karen spent her days walking around the neighborhood with her clipboard, looking for violations. She would fine people for having the wrong color flowers, parking their cars slightly wrong, or leaving their garbage cans out too long. She seemed to enjoy making people upset. Last month, she fined the Johnson family $200 because their 7-year-old son left his bicycle on the front lawn overnight. When Mrs. Johnson tried to explain that her son was sick with the flu, Karen didn't care. Rules are rules, she said coldly. Karen also hated children. She complained constantly about kids playing outside, saying they were too loud and messy. She tried to ban chalk drawings on sidewalks and wanted to remove the playground from our neighborhood park. Most parents kept their children inside when they saw Karen coming. But I never imagined she would target a helpless newborn baby. On Grace's 4th day home, I was sitting on my front porch, gently rocking her in my arms. The morning sun was warm and Grace was sleeping peacefully. I was just enjoying this quiet moment with my daughter when I saw Karen marching toward my house. She was carrying her usual clipboard and had that familiar angry expression on her face. My heart sank. What could she possibly complain about now? "Excuse me," Karen said in her sharp voice. "You can't have that baby out here." I looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I'm just holding my daughter." "It's against HOA regulations," she said, pointing to her clipboard. "No crying babies are allowed outside between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. It disturbs the peace of the neighborhood." I stared at her in disbelief. "That's not a real rule. Babies are allowed to be outside." Karen's face turned red with anger. "I make the rules here. If I say no babies outside, then no babies outside." "She's not even crying," I said, looking down at Grace's sleeping face. "She's just sleeping." "They always cry eventually," Karen snapped. "Take it inside now or I'll call the police." I was shocked by her cruelty, but I didn't want to cause trouble. Grace was still recovering from birth, and I needed to keep stress away from both of us. I stood up carefully and went inside, my hands shaking with anger. Jake was furious when I told him what happened. "She can't make up fake rules about babies," he said. "That's completely illegal." But we decided to avoid confrontation for now. We had bigger concerns, like taking care of our newborn daughter and adjusting to being new parents. We had no idea that Karen's harassment was just beginning. Over the next few days, Karen's behavior got worse. She started walking past our house multiple times a day, always slowing down to stare at our windows. She was looking for any excuse to complain about us. On Tuesday, she left a note on our door saying our car was parked 2 inches over the property line. The next day, she complained that our porch light was too bright and might disturb other neighbors. On Thursday, she said our mailbox was dirty and needed to be cleaned immediately. Each complaint came with a threat of fines or police involvement. Karen was clearly targeting us because I had dared to question her made-up rule about babies. The stress was affecting me badly. I was already dealing with the exhaustion and emotions that come with having a newborn. Karen's constant harassment was making everything worse. I started having anxiety attacks and couldn't sleep even when Grace was sleeping. Jake tried to talk to Karen directly, but she refused to listen. "Your wife is a troublemaker," she told him. "She needs to learn respect for authority." We decided to start documenting Karen's harassment. Jake set up a security camera on our front porch to record any incidents. We also started keeping a written log of every complaint and threat. We thought we were just dealing with a difficult neighbor. We never imagined Karen was planning something truly evil. On Saturday morning, exactly 1 week after Grace came home, everything changed. I had been up most of the night because Grace was having trouble sleeping. She wasn't sick, just going through a normal adjustment period that many newborns experience. I was exhausted and decided to take Grace outside for some fresh air. Sometimes a change of environment helps babies calm down. I wrapped her in a soft pink blanket and sat on our front porch swing. Grace was fussy but not really crying loudly. She was making those small baby sounds that all newborns make. To me, it was the sweetest sound in the world. I was gently bouncing her and whispering soft words to help her relax. That's when I saw Karen storming across the street toward our house. She looked angrier than I had ever seen her before. Her face was twisted with rage and she was walking so fast that she was almost running. "I warned you," she screamed as she got closer. "I told you no crying babies outside." "She's barely making any noise," I said, trying to stay calm. "And this is my own property. I don't care," Karen yelled. "You're disturbing everyone in the neighborhood with that thing." She called my precious baby that thing. The cruelty in her voice made my blood run cold. "Please lower your voice," I said. "You're actually making more noise than my baby." That was apparently the wrong thing to say. Karen's eyes filled with a hatred that scared me. She looked like she wanted to hurt both me and Grace. "I'll show you what real noise is," she hissed. Then she turned around and marched back to her house. I thought she was leaving, but I was wrong. She was going to get something that would change our lives forever. Karen came back 5 minutes later carrying a large cardboard box. She was moving differently now, more focused and determined. There was something terrifying about the way she was walking toward us. "What are you doing?" I asked, standing up and holding Grace closer to my chest. "Solving a problem," Karen said coldly. Before I could react, she grabbed Grace right out of my arms. My baby was so small that Karen could easily overpower me. Grace started crying from the sudden movement and strange hands touching her. "Give me back my baby," I screamed, reaching for Grace. Karen pushed me away with her free hand. I stumbled and almost fell down the porch steps. "You had your chance to follow the rules," she said. Then, to my absolute horror, Karen put my crying baby inside the cardboard box. Grace's terrified cries echoed from inside the box as Karen closed the flaps. "What are you doing?" I screamed, trying to grab the box. "That's my baby." Karen pushed me away again, this time harder. "Teaching you a lesson about respect," she said. She started walking toward the back of our house, carrying the box with my baby inside. I followed her, crying and begging her to give Grace back. But Karen ignored me completely. She walked straight to the small river that ran behind our neighborhood. The river wasn't very deep, but it was fast-moving and cold. Even a strong adult could drown in it if they weren't careful. "Please don't do this," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "She's just a baby. She didn't do anything wrong." Karen looked at me with cold, empty eyes. "Maybe next time you'll follow the rules." Then she threw the box containing my newborn daughter into the river. The box hit the water with a splash and immediately started floating downstream. I could hear Grace's muffled cries from inside as the current carried her away. Without thinking, I jumped into the cold river. The water was deeper than it looked and the current was stronger than I expected. But I didn't care about my own safety. My baby was drowning and I had to save her. The cardboard box was getting soggy and starting to fall apart. Water was seeping through the bottom, and I knew Grace didn't have much time. I swam as hard as I could, fighting against the current. Behind me, I could hear Karen laughing. She was actually enjoying watching a mother try to save her drowning baby. The sound of her laughter will haunt me for the rest of my life. I reached the box just as it was starting to sink. The cardboard was falling apart in my hands, but I managed to pull Grace out. She was soaking wet, freezing cold, and screaming in terror. I held her against my chest and struggled to get back to shore. The current kept pushing us downstream and I was getting tired. For a moment, I thought we were both going to drown. But somehow, I found the strength to keep swimming. I dragged myself and Grace out of the water about 50 yards downstream from where Karen had thrown us in. Grace was alive, but she was hypothermic and in shock. Her lips were blue and her skin was ice cold. I knew I had to get her to a hospital immediately. I ran back to our house, soaking wet and carrying my freezing baby. Karen was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared as soon as she realized her plan had failed. Jake was in the garage and heard me screaming. When he saw us both dripping wet and Grace's blue lips, he immediately understood that something terrible had happened. "Call 911. I shouted. Karen threw Grace in the river. Jake's face went white with shock and rage. He called for an ambulance while I tried to warm Grace up with dry blankets. Her crying had turned into weak whimpers, which scared me even more. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes. They immediately began treating Grace for hypothermia and potential drowning. They wrapped her in special warming blankets and checked her breathing and heart rate. "She needs to go to the hospital right now," the lead paramedic said. "Hypothermia can be very dangerous for newborns." As they loaded Grace into the ambulance, I told them exactly what had happened. The paramedic's face showed shock and disgust when I described Karen's attack. "Someone threw a baby in a river?" he repeated, making sure he heard correctly. "Yes," I said, climbing into the ambulance with Grace. "The HOA president. She said she was teaching me a lesson." The paramedic shook his head in disbelief and immediately radioed the police. "We have a case of attempted murder of an infant," he said into his radio. At the hospital, doctors worked quickly to treat Grace's hypothermia. They put her in a special warming bed and monitored her vital signs carefully. Dr. Peterson, the pediatrician, explained that hypothermia could cause serious complications in newborns. "Her core body temperature dropped dangerously low," he said. "We need to warm her up slowly and watch for any signs of organ damage." I sat beside Grace's warming bed, holding her tiny hand and crying. She looked so small and fragile with all the medical equipment around her. The thought that someone had deliberately tried to kill my innocent baby was unbearable. Jake paced the room like a caged animal. "I'm going to destroy Karen," he kept saying. "She tried to murder our daughter." The police arrived at the hospital about an hour later. Detective Martinez and Officer Thompson took our statements and asked detailed questions about what happened. They also took photos of Grace's condition and the wet clothes we were wearing. "This is one of the most shocking cases I've ever seen," Detective Martinez said. "Attempting to drown a newborn baby is beyond comprehension." They explained that Karen would be charged with attempted murder, child endangerment, and assault. The penalties were severe. She could face 20 years to life in prison. "We need to arrest her immediately," Officer Thompson said. "She's clearly dangerous and could hurt other children." But when the police went to Karen's house, she was gone. Karen had fled as soon as she realized the police would be called. Her husband Robert came home from work to find police cars surrounding his house and his wife missing. Robert was devastated when he learned what Karen had done. "I knew she had problems with anger," he told the police, "but I never imagined she could hurt a baby." He cooperated fully with the investigation and gave police access to search the house. They found Karen's computer, which contained disturbing evidence of her obsession with controlling the neighborhood. Karen had been keeping detailed files on every family, including photos of their children and notes about their daily routines. She had written angry messages about families with babies, calling them neighborhood parasites and noise polluters. Most shocking of all, they found her journal. In it, Karen had written about her plans to eliminate the baby problem in the neighborhood. She had been planning to attack Grace for days. "Saturday will be the day I solve the crying baby situation once and for all," she had written the night before the attack. "No one will ignore my authority after this." The journal entries showed that this wasn't a sudden angry outburst. Karen had planned to hurt my baby, which made her crime even more serious. Police issued an immediate arrest warrant and put out an alert to find Karen. Her photo was sent to airports, bus stations, and train stations throughout the state. While the police searched for Karen, I stayed by Grace's side at the hospital. The doctors said she was responding well to treatment, but they wanted to monitor her for 48 hours to make sure there were no complications. Grace's body temperature slowly returned to normal, and her skin color improved. But I could see changes in her behavior that broke my heart. She seemed more nervous and cried more easily. The trauma had affected her even at such a young age. Dr. Peterson assured me that babies are resilient and that Grace would likely recover completely with time and love. But he also referred us to a child psychologist who specialized in infant trauma. "What she experienced was terrifying," he explained. "Babies can be affected by trauma, even if they don't understand what happened." I felt so guilty. I kept thinking that I should have protected Grace better. I should have gone inside when Karen first complained. I should have fought harder when she grabbed my baby. Jake held me while I cried. "This is not your fault," he said firmly. Karen is a monster. You saved Grace's life by jumping in that river. But the guilt was overwhelming. Every time I looked at Grace, I remembered the sound of her muffled cries from inside that box as it floated away. Word of Karen's attack spread quickly through our neighborhood. People were horrified that someone could try to drown a baby over HOA complaints. Families started visiting us at the hospital with flowers, food, and offers of help. Mrs. Johnson brought homemade soup and cried when she saw Grace in her hospital bed. I always knew Karen was mean, she said, but I never thought she was evil. The Martinez family offered to help with household chores while we recovered. Mr. Thompson, who was a lawyer, offered to help us press charges and sue Karen for damages. Even people I had never spoken to before came to show their support. The attack on Grace had united the entire neighborhood against Karen's reign of terror. Parents shared stories of how Karen had threatened their children over minor issues. One mother said Karen had grabbed her 4-year-old son's arm hard enough to leave bruises because he was riding his bike on the sidewalk. She's been escalating for months, said Mrs. Peterson. We should have done something sooner. Everyone felt guilty that they hadn't stood up to Karen before she hurt an innocent baby. But nobody had imagined she was capable of attempted murder. On Tuesday morning, 3 days after the attack, police found Karen at a cheap motel 2 hours away from our town. She had been hiding there since Saturday, paying cash and using a fake name. Detective Martinez called us at the hospital with the news. We got her, he said. Karen Whitfield is under arrest for attempted murder. The arrest happened at 6 a.m. when police surrounded the motel. Karen tried to run but was caught in the parking lot. Witnesses said she was screaming about how the baby deserved it and how she was protecting the neighborhood. Her erratic behavior during the arrest was captured on police body cameras. The footage would later be used in court to show her state of mind. Jake and I felt a mixture of relief and anger when we heard about the arrest. We were glad she couldn't hurt anyone else, but we were still furious about what she had done to Grace. Good, Jake said when he heard the news. Now she can face justice for what she did. But the best news came later that day. Robert, Karen's husband, showed up at the police station where she was being processed. He wasn't there to support his wife, he was there to serve her with divorce papers. Robert had been married to Karen for 15 years, but her attack on Grace was the final straw. He told reporters that he could no longer be married to someone who would try to kill a baby. I thought I knew the woman I married, he said with tears in his eyes. But the person who threw that baby in the river is a stranger to me. She's a monster. The timing of the divorce papers was perfect justice. Karen was led into the police station in handcuffs, still wet and dirty from hiding in a motel. That's when Robert's lawyer served her with the papers. According to witnesses, Karen completely broke down when she realized her husband was leaving her. She started screaming and crying, begging Robert not to abandon her. You can't leave me, she sobbed. I did this for us. I was protecting our neighborhood. But Robert just looked at her with disgust. You tried to murder a baby, he said coldly. There's no excuse for that. I want nothing to do with you ever again. Karen's arrest and divorce were captured by news cameras that had gathered at the police station. The footage of her being served divorce papers while in handcuffs became viral on social media. People across the country watched in satisfaction as the woman who tried to drown a baby faced the consequences of her actions. Grace was finally released from the hospital on Wednesday, 4 days after the attack. Her vital signs were normal, and doctors said she had made a complete physical recovery. But I was still terrified about bringing her home. The house where Karen had grabbed her felt unsafe now. Every time I looked at our front porch, I remembered the sound of Grace's cries as she was carried away. Jake had spent the day baby-proofing everything and installing additional security cameras. He also arranged for a security system with panic buttons in every room. Karen is in jail, he reminded me. She can't hurt Grace anymore. But trauma doesn't listen to logic. I found myself constantly checking on Grace, even when she was sleeping peacefully. I was afraid to take her outside even in our own backyard. The child psychologist, Dr. Williams, came to our house to help us adjust. She explained that it was normal for both Grace and me to have anxiety after such a traumatic event. Healing takes time, she said. Be patient with yourselves and with Grace. She taught us techniques to help Grace feel safe and secure. We learned special ways to hold her, soothe her, and create a calm environment for her recovery. Slowly, Grace began to seem more like herself. Her crying became less frequent, and she started sleeping for longer periods. But I could tell she was still affected by what happened. News of Karen's attack on Grace spread beyond our local area. National news stations picked up the story, and it became headline news across the country. HOA president throws baby in river was trending on social media for days. People were outraged that someone in a position of neighborhood authority could commit such a horrible crime. Reporters camped outside our house wanting interviews about the attack. We decided not to speak to the media until after Karen's trial. We wanted to focus on Grace's recovery, not reliving the trauma on television. But the public attention had some positive effects. Legal experts on TV explained that Karen's crime was extremely serious and that she would likely face decades in prison. Child safety advocates used our story to highlight the importance of protecting children from unstable adults. The incident led to discussions about HOA power and accountability. No one should have the authority to terrorize families in their own neighborhood, said child advocate Maria Santos on the evening news. The story also inspired other families to speak up about HOA abuse. People across the country shared their own experiences with power-hungry neighborhood officials. Karen's trial was scheduled for 3 months later. During that time, she remained in jail without bail because the judge considered her a danger to the community. The prosecutor, District Attorney James Wilson, met with us several times to prepare for the trial. He explained that Karen was facing multiple serious charges: attempted murder in the first degree, child endangerment, assault and battery, kidnapping. If convicted on all charges, she could spend the rest of her life in prison. This is one of the most clear-cut cases I've ever prosecuted, DA Wilson told us. We have multiple witnesses, physical evidence, and Karen's own journal showing premeditation. The defense attorney tried to argue that Karen was mentally ill and not responsible for her actions. But the prosecution had evidence that she knew exactly what she was doing. Karen's journal entries showed careful planning, and her behavior after the attack demonstrated that she understood the consequences of her actions. She had fled and hidden, which showed consciousness of guilt. During the months before trial, we focused on helping Grace heal and grow. She was developing normally and seemed to be recovering from the trauma. But I knew the trial would bring back difficult memories for all of us. The trial started on a cold Monday morning in November. The courthouse was packed with reporters, neighbors, and people who had followed our story in the news. Karen looked very different from the powerful HOA president who had terrorized our neighborhood. She was thinner, her hair was gray and unkempt, and she kept her head down throughout the proceedings. In his opening statement, DA Wilson painted a clear picture of Karen's crime. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a woman who tried to commit the ultimate act of cruelty, murdering an innocent baby to satisfy her need for control. He explained how Karen had escalated from petty HOA complaints to attempted murder in just 1 week. He described her journal entries planning the attack and her lack of remorse afterward. Karen's defense attorney tried to portray her as a mentally ill woman who snapped under pressure. But his arguments fell flat when faced with the evidence of premeditation. The first witness was Jake, who testified about Karen's harassment in the days leading up to the attack. He spoke clearly and calmly, but I could see the anger in his eyes when he looked at Karen. Then it was my turn to testify. Taking the witness stand was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I had to relive the worst day of my life in front of a room full of strangers, including the woman who had tried to kill my baby. DA Wilson asked me to describe exactly what happened that Saturday morning. I spoke clearly and calmly, but inside I was shaking with emotion. She grabbed Grace right out of my arms, I testified. My baby started crying because she was scared. Karen put her in a cardboard box and closed the flaps. The jury looked horrified as I described Karen carrying the box to the river and throwing it into the water. I could hear Grace's muffled cries from inside the box as it floated away. I said, tears starting to flow. I thought I was going to lose my baby forever. Several jury members were crying as I described jumping into the river to save Grace. One woman covered her mouth in shock when I explained how the cardboard box was falling apart in the water. Karen's attorney tried to make it seem like the attack was a momentary lapse in judgment. But I was able to testify about Karen's escalating harassment and her journal entries planning the attack. This wasn't a sudden decision, I said firmly. She had been planning to hurt Grace for days. When I finished testifying, the entire courtroom was silent except for the sound of people crying. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of Karen's guilt. They showed the jury Karen's journal entries planning the attack, security camera footage of her grabbing Grace, photos of Grace's hypothermia treatment at the hospital, witness testimony from neighbors about Karen's threats, expert testimony about the dangers of infant hypothermia. Dr. Peterson testified about Grace's medical treatment and how close she came to dying from hypothermia and drowning. If Emma hadn't reached her when she did, he testified, Grace would not have survived. The combination of cold water and lack of oxygen would have killed her within minutes. The most damaging evidence was Karen's own journal. The prosecution read entry after entry showing her growing obsession with solving the baby problem. Her final entry, written the night before the attack, was particularly chilling. "Tomorrow I will show this neighborhood what happens when people ignore my authority. The crying baby situation will be permanently resolved." The defense had no real response to this evidence. Their mental illness argument crumbled when faced with proof that Karen had planned the attack carefully. On the third day of trial, Karen had a complete mental breakdown in the courtroom. As the prosecution played security camera footage of her throwing Grace into the river, Karen started screaming. "She deserved it," Karen yelled, standing up at the defense table. "That baby was ruining everything. I was protecting the neighborhood." Her outburst proved that she felt no remorse for her actions. The judge had to call a recess while bailiffs restrained Karen and removed her from the courtroom. When court resumed, Karen's attorney tried to use her outburst as evidence of mental illness. But it actually helped the prosecution's case by showing her callous attitude toward attempting to murder a baby. "The defendant just showed you her true feelings," DA Wilson told the jury. "She's not sorry for what she did. She still believes she was justified in trying to kill Grace." The defense rested their case quickly after Karen's outburst. They knew they had no chance of convincing the jury that attempted baby murder was excusable. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours before reaching a verdict. When they returned to the courtroom, their faces were grim and determined. "On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault and battery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty." Karen collapsed when she heard the guilty verdicts. Her attorney had to help her stay standing as the judge read the jury's decision. Jake and I held hands tightly as we listened to each guilty verdict. Finally, justice was being served for what Karen had done to Grace. Several jury members were crying as they confirmed their verdict. Later, one juror told reporters, "We couldn't understand how anyone could try to hurt a helpless baby. The evidence was overwhelming." The judge scheduled Karen's sentencing for the following week. With convictions on all charges, she was facing life in prison without the possibility of parole. Karen's sentencing hearing was packed with people who wanted to see justice done. Many of our neighbors came to show their support for our family. Before announcing the sentence, Judge Harrison allowed me to read a victim impact statement. I had written down everything I wanted to say to Karen about how her actions had affected our family. "You tried to murder my innocent baby because you were angry about imaginary HOA violations," I said, looking directly at Karen. "Grace was only 4 days old when you threw her into that river. She had never hurt anyone or done anything wrong." I described the months of therapy and anxiety we had endured because of her attack. I talked about how Grace still sometimes seemed nervous and how I was afraid to let her out of my sight. "You stole our sense of safety and peace," I continued. "But you didn't break our family. Grace is alive and healthy and we're stronger than ever." Karen kept her head down during my entire statement. She never looked at me or showed any sign of remorse. When I finished, Judge Harrison announced Karen's sentence. "Karen Whitfield, you have been convicted of attempting to murder a helpless infant. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted in applause. Finally, Karen would pay the ultimate price for her horrific crime. As Karen was led away in handcuffs to begin her life sentence, she received one final blow. Her divorce from Robert had been finalized while she was in jail awaiting trial. Robert had used Karen's criminal conviction to get a quick divorce and keep all their shared assets. Karen lost her house, her savings, and her freedom all at the same time. In addition to her criminal conviction, we also won a civil lawsuit against Karen for damages. The court awarded us $2 million to cover Grace's medical expenses, therapy costs, and emotional trauma. Since Karen had no money left after the divorce, we were able to claim her former house and other assets. The house where she had lived while terrorizing our neighborhood was sold, and the money went toward Grace's future education and medical care. Karen's life was completely destroyed. She went from being a powerful HOA president to a convicted felon serving life in prison with no money, no family, and no hope of ever being released. After Karen's conviction, our neighborhood began to heal from years of her tyranny. The HOA elected a new president, Mrs. Johnson, a kind grandmother who believed in bringing people together instead of tearing them apart. The new HOA board canceled all of Karen's unfair fines and ridiculous rules. They created family-friendly policies that encouraged children to play outside and neighbors to get to know each other. "Our neighborhood should be a place where families feel safe and welcome," Mrs. Johnson said at her first meeting as president. "Children especially should feel free to be children." They organized block parties, playground improvements, and community gardens. The atmosphere changed completely from fear and isolation to friendship and cooperation. Many neighbors apologized to us for not standing up to Karen sooner. They felt guilty that it took an attack on a baby for everyone to unite against her bullying. But we didn't blame anyone. Karen was skilled at intimidating people and making them afraid to speak up. Her reign of terror was finally over, and that was what mattered most. Grace's first birthday was a celebration not just of her life, but of survival and justice. We threw a big party in our backyard and invited the whole neighborhood. Watching Grace laugh and play with other children was the most beautiful sight in the world. She had grown into a happy, healthy toddler with no apparent lasting effects from Karen's attack. Dr. Williams, the child psychologist, told us that Grace's complete recovery was a testament to the love and security we had provided after the trauma. "Children are resilient when they have supportive families," she explained. Grace learned that she's safe and loved, which helped her heal. At the party, Mrs. Johnson presented Grace with a special gift from the neighborhood, a savings account that everyone had contributed to for her future education. "This little girl brought our community together," Mrs. Johnson said. "We want to make sure she knows how much she means to all of us." Grace gurgled happily as everyone sang "Happy Birthday" to her. She had no memory of the terrible thing that happened when she was 4 days old. All she knew was love, safety, and the joy of being surrounded by people who cared about her. Our story became a symbol of justice prevailing over evil. News outlets continued to follow up on our case, using it as an example of how communities can come together to protect children. Child safety organizations invited me to speak at conferences about recognizing and stopping adult predators who target children. I shared our story to help other parents understand the warning signs of dangerous behavior. Karen didn't suddenly become evil overnight, I would tell audiences. She escalated gradually from complaints to harassment to attempted murder. We need to take threats against children seriously, even when they seem minor. The story also led to changes in HOA regulations across the country. Many states passed laws limiting the power of homeowners associations and creating oversight to prevent abuse. Grace's case was cited in several of these new laws, which were designed to protect families from power-hungry HOA officials. I was proud that our terrible experience had helped make other children safer. Karen's evil act had backfired completely. Instead of terrorizing one family into submission, she had sparked a movement to protect children everywhere. 5 years have passed since Karen threw Grace into that river. Grace is now a happy 6-year-old who loves to play outside, ride her bike and splash in swimming pools with no fear of water. She doesn't remember what happened to her as a baby, and we've decided not to tell her until she's older. For now, she just knows that she's loved and safe.